Today on CityCast DC, Washington has just passed some big changes to the law that's supposed to help tenants buy their apartments if the landlord decides to sell. So is this like a shameless giveaway to big real estate? Or is it a much-needed evisceration of the red tape that makes DC housing so scarce? Emilia Calma from the DC Policy Center is here to walk us through the not-totally-wonky details. Today is Monday, October 27th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Emilia, welcome back.
Oh, hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
All right, so for folks who are not aware, and we promise we're going to try to get through this without a lot of acronyms here, but what exactly is TOPA? What was it designed to do? What does it do?
TOPA it stands for the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It was designed to help keep tenants in place by giving them a way to purchase their buildings.
So like if you are an apartment and the building goes up for sale and you're a tenant, this law is supposed to give you some sort of chance to buy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gave tenants a timeline and set of procedures so that they could organize and match the purchase price and buy the building. It's changed many times over the years. So nowadays, most units do remain as rentals. And when tenants organize, they instead assign their right to purchase to either the original person who was trying to buy it or like a different person of their choosing.
Meaning if you're in an apartment building and it goes up for sale, this law, it was designed to help you buy it, but now it's a thing that tenants can use basically to get some benefit for themselves out of the sale, that they will assign their rights, I assume for a fee, to whoever it is who wants to buy it.
Yep. Yeah, they could assign their rights for like monetary compensation. It could be an affordability deal for the current tenants or for the building, or it could be something along the lines of building improvements.
Got it. So this is one of the things that over the years has caused big landlords and real estate developers to kind of really resent this legislation. They say it adds a lot of hassle to their ability to sell properties, to their ability to get things on the market or get new ownership in place. So as you alluded to, it's been like tinkered with a bunch over the years, including this year, when the DC Council has voted to change it a bit with this thing called the Rental Act. These measures to change it are often cast as like, playing nice with the landlords at the expense of the tenants. What is the Rental Act? What did it change and why did it do so? What was the reason for doing so?
The Rental Act made a lot of changes. So I would say what gets talked about a lot is there's now some exemptions for who goes through TOPA. So new buildings that were built in the last 15 years are now exempt from TOPA, and some sales are also exempt where the current management stays in place. So for example, like this is just a transfers of equity between existing owners or like an entry and exit of like a capital partner, but the main developer and manager of the building remains the same. And they've also exempted 2 to 4 unit buildings from TOPA, where the owner is a person and not a corporation. And a lot of those, some of those are older apartment buildings that have like only 2 to 4 units in them. But the majority of them are actually probably reformatted row homes, where someone rents out the top floor and then the English basement as a separate unit, or they've even divided the house into different units for each floor. So those are the main exemptions. And then there's also been some tenant protections thrown in there as well. There's added support for tenant support providers. There's a tax break.
What's the tenant support provider?
Basically a organization that helps the tenants move through the TOPA process and gives them free counsel. So there's now a certification process for them, and tenants are now going to receive a list of all the tenant support providers they can talk to get through this process. There's been a cooling off period where rights can't be assigned anymore for the first 45 days of a negotiation. unless the tenants have already talked to one of these tenant support providers.
All right, so but before we get too far down in the weeds, let's talk about the reasoning here. Um, Basically, they've changed this law in a way that takes away the right to first refusal or the right to buy from certain types of tenants, including, as you said, people in newer buildings, people in these smaller buildings, et cetera. What was the reason? Like, what's the argument for why that's a good thing to do?
Well, in the newer buildings, essentially, like DC needs to create more housing. This is going to ensure long-term affordability and help keep rents stabilized for now. And right now, people are having a really hard time attracting investment to DC because investors see TOPA as an impediment to like getting out of those deals. So usually there's like an initial investor who pays for a building, and then they want to sell all their stake in that building after a certain amount of time, like say 5 years to 15 years, somewhere in that range. And TOPA creates a lot of uncertainty and can make sales take much longer, up to over a year longer, which can often make a sale fall apart due to changing interest rates and other factors.
And I guess the argument's also that it adds a cost here, which is then passed along to whoever buys it, which is then leads inevitably to like higher costs to tenants or condo buyers or whatever. So the argument, I guess, is all of this, they call it red tape, is actually a reason why housing is so unaffordable in Washington, even though the original purpose of this legislation was to help the little guy.
Exactly. So yeah, its intent is to create more housing overall, which should create more affordability and help tenants in the long term. What also contributed to this was just data on what buildings were being sold and where tenant associations were forming. Tenants have to get together to form an association to exercise their TOPA rights. And almost all the sales, like 94% of sales, were happening in rent-controlled buildings, not new buildings. And that's the same for almost all the tenant association formations. So only 4% of tenant associations formed in buildings that were less than 15 years old.
What was the argument? I mean, this argument for doing this was not unanimously agreed. It was not unanimously shared. What's the argument against it? Like, there's people who think of this change as a big sop to deep-pocketed people.
The argument against doing this is that, before tenants could have gotten together to buy a building, and, up until recently, like they theoretically could have, and now they can't. And so some of the council and some tenant advocates did not want to see those options go away for current tenants.
Hey, DC. With everything happening in the political world right now, I've got a chance for you to come together and dig deeper. Double Exposure Investigative Film Festival, where investigative journalism meets cutting-edge documentary, is happening Thursday, October 30th through Sunday, November 2nd, right here in DC. This year's lineup explores how truth, trust, and power are being reshaped in real time. There's the U.S. premiere of Eugene Jarecki's Golden Globe-winning deep dive into WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange called The $6 Billion Man, and Cover Up, the new film from Oscar winner Laura Poitras and Emmy winner Mark Obenhaus, along with 23 more film premieres never before seen in Washington. Plus, there's panels and workshops with the journalists and filmmakers behind the films. In a moment when facts and narratives are constantly shifting, Double Exposure is a place to gather and discover, to question and connect. Catch the full lineup and get your tickets at dxfest.com. That's dxfest.com.
So there's a lot of agita, particularly about the sort of late addition to this law, which was the measure that you mentioned that would exempt 2 to 4 unit buildings from TOPA, including the Scooby-Doo mansion in Mount Pleasant, which is a old Victorian pile that has a bunch of different tenants and is sort of almost like a community center more than a house, and where the tenants had been thinking about trying to buy it. Why was that? Why did that happen so late? Who wanted that, and why has it been particularly a sore subject?
Sure. So this was introduced in the September legislative meeting by Anita Bonds, and its intention was to help homeowners sell their properties, the intention was to help homeowners sell their properties and also incentivize current homeowners to rent out parts of their homes as rentals. But yeah, in the justification for why they exempted 2 to 4 unit properties, they're saying 77% of these buildings are owned by individual landlords, not corporations. And 41% of those owners actually live in the building. So again, a lot of these are row homes where probably they're renting out a basement or like another unit within the house. So 41% of those owners live in the buildings. So they're likely renting out, a basement or other unit in their home. And you also asked why they had gone back and forth so much on this. They had brought this up in this September legislative meeting. There were amendments in that meeting. They were going back and forth and ended up postponing it and then postponing the revote, I think 3 different times, and just came back to it this week. And the reason for that is there's just a lot of confusion about this. Like, there's a lot of confusion about the language, like what is a business corporation, what is an entity. And there's a lot of confusion about whether or not they'd be able to enforce it. So originally the law had said that it would only apply to people who owned like 2 units in the district, but title companies had come back and said that they'd never be able to actually figure that out and provide title insurance to people who were selling their homes. So we really had to figure out a lot of these technical details. The logic is that individuals who don't have the capacity or financial means to go through the TOPA process might not be renting availability that they have in their house because they can't afford to go through this TOPA process when they want to sell. And so the hope from Anita Bonds and other council members is that by exempting these units from the TOPA process, we would actually create more units in this, we call it the shadow market, but this kind of less regulated market, which usually is a source of hidden affordability in DC. Like, a lot of the most affordable places to live, especially in nicer areas in the district, are these English basements and these rented out row homes.
But she was saying that if I'm like a person with a house, I might be afraid to rent out my English basement if I think that, what if I lose my job and have to sell my house? The current set of laws could leave me hanging up in court with my tenant for years when I actually just need the money by selling my house.
Exactly. Like, people are afraid of delays or afraid that, this is going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars in, demanded payments by tenants or other things when they try to sell their homes. So, yeah, the thought is that this will help incentivize more rental units in these single-family homes.
So the stated goal of this rental act is to cut red tape. And I'm curious if it does that. Like, when I hear you saying things like 45 days and with a tenant support organization, that all sounds like red tape to me.
It actually doesn't change the current timeline of negotiations at all. So, yeah, the 45-day cooling off period, it doesn't lengthen the amount of time. But TOPA is a really heavily procedural law. And there are usually a lot of lawyers involved and title companies ensuring that all these very technical proceedings are followed. It has to be a specific type of mail that goes to the tenant. There has to be specific days when things are delivered. It's a very procedural and technical thing that people go through.
Does any of that proceduralism change now?
I don't think so, with the exception of the cooling off period and some added things about the tenant support providers and deed recordation tax relief for affordable housing providers. Like, none of the procedural elements have substantively changed.
I mean, the argument against this is Washington has really robust tenant protections, and this reduces those protections. Does it do that?
I don't think it necessarily reduces those protections. I mean, if you're a tenant and you live in a single family home or an apartment building or anywhere, and your building goes up for sale, you still get to live there as a tenant. Like, you don't get evicted or moved out. The new landlord assumes your lease at your current rate. And so I don't think any of those necessarily like tenant protections are gone. But again, for some subsection of the market, people might not have like the extra time to organize to potentially be able to buy their units or to necessarily pick the next owner.
I mean, it's the system that evolved. As DC first passed these laws in 1980, I think. It's the system that evolved what they envisioned when they passed them. Because it seems to me that, they sold it as this is going to help tenants buy their units. But the status quo now, that happens in the minority of cases. In the majority of them, it's more that it helps tenants achieve a more favorable settlement, and represents like a full employment program for a lot of lawyers. Is that like a perversion of what was envisioned when this law was first passed, or is that inevitable consequence and it's still leading to a good thing and that tenants get some help?
Yeah, I don't think that what's happening now is the original intention of the law, but I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, if this does help, if it does help some people have some sense of ownership of the sales process, if it helps them, create more affordability in their buildings, like, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I do think that this like expanded process has led to a lot of confusion. And over time, there's also been just a lot of, strange predatory behavior in the system. One good example is this used to happen a lot, especially in the 2 to 4 unit buildings where, someone would be setting it up to sale and a random third party person would go to all the tenants and say, if you assign me your rights, I can ensure that you'll get X amount of money. And then they would turn around and go back to the current owner and be like, all right, I hold your tenant's right to purchase. You now have to give me 5 times the amount of money of what I promised to the tenants, or else I'm not going to allow your sale to proceed at all. And most of that money, there's no regulation on how much money actually went to the tenants versus that third party person. So there's that's one example of like really bad behavior on their part that was fixed by the Rental Act. Now you can't get money for selling like the second time someone's right to purchase.
The argument for creating new exemptions to tenant right to purchase and limiting these sorts of sales has been, in recent years, very powerful, which is that Washington's housing is incredibly expensive and growing more expensive, and there's a scarcity of it. And developers have argued, I think correctly, that all of this stuff, this what they call red tape with sales of buildings that have tenants in them, only reduces the amount of housing on the market. It discourages people from wanting to build new stuff here because they see it turning into a bag of snakes down the line. And it discourages people from selling to someone who might do a better job, et cetera. In the last year or two, the last year particularly, we've seen this pretty dramatic change in the atmosphere in Washington in the age of Doge and the Trump administration. Real estate is softening. There's a lot more inventory on the market. The lack of supply seems a lot less urgent to some people. Does that take away the arguments for some of these things? That so much of public policy has been really muscled in a direction of we must create more housing because we're in a crisis. Is the urgency still there? Should it still be there?
I think so. I think part of the reason that we have such housing unaffordability is that we didn't build almost any housing in between the 1970s and about 2005. There were about 45 years in there where just almost nothing got built in DC. And that's why we had such a lack of supply and why prices are much higher or like have gone up so much. And I think right now we're on the brink of potentially another slump. We've seen housing permits plummet to, maybe like 1,000 units a year when we used to be producing 7,000 to 8,000 units a year. And if we stop producing housing now, this crisis is just only going to get worse and worse over time. Versus whatever we do build now is going to be our naturally occurring affordable housing 20, 30 years from now. So I see this as, it helps keep prices stable like right now in this moment. But it also stops like another huge affordability crisis from looming in a couple decades.
I'm curious, people talk about the softening real estate market, and they're always talking about the sales price of houses and condos. What has happened in the last year in the rental market? Have prices moderated there too?
In some places, prices have gone down a little bit. Like I think in some areas of DC, we've seen rental and housing prices go down. And in some areas, we've seen them still going up. So I can't say it's uniform across the district. I think in Northwest DC and in Georgetown and some of these other areas, you still see rental and home prices going up. And in some areas like, Northeast, Southeast, and, kind of like mid-city, you've seen some of the rental and housing prices go down a little bit, especially for condos.
So the council has now passed this legislation. The mayor, Muriel Bowser, she has 30 days to review it. It also has to undergo congressional review. The backstory here is this was a measure she had championed. The council then, there was a bunch of amendments put in that she said would have gutted it. Those amendments were then taken back out. So it sounds to me like she would be in favor of this. Do you have any sense of what will happen? Will she sign it? And is there any potential Congress trouble?
It's really hard to say. I think the majority of council has approved it. And so I somewhat expect that even if it wasn't signed by the mayor, that they might overrule her and get it passed anyway. And these days, it's really hard to predict what Congress is going to find interesting or not. So, but yeah, I foresee this being passed. And I think it'll be interesting to see like what happens from it after it does. I hope we do see a lot more units on the market. It has some provisions about data collection too, and a data transparency portal is what they're calling it, but basically publicly available information on like how many TOPA processes there have been and what the outcomes have been and what tenants have negotiated for. And I think that information will be really valuable going forward too.
Emilia Calma, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And if you enjoyed this conversation, consider becoming a CityCast member. You can do that at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.